The presentation of anarchism as social philosophy which aims at the emancipation, economic, social, political, and spiritual of the human race. The emancipation.
Anarchist Essays is brought to you by Loughborough University's Anarchism Research Group. For more information on the ARG, see the link in the show notes or follow us on Twitter at ARGLBORO.
Mysteries of a Hobo's Life, T-Bone Slim and the Industrial Workers of the World. An essay by Iain McIntyre.
And Owen Clayton. T-Bone Slim is an enigma. A man of many names, he was largely unknown, even to the people who knew him best. A hobo and transient worker in the early 20th century United States, his peripatetic lifestyle meant that he never truly revealed himself to anyone. To some, he was T-Bone Slim, a comic philosopher, musician, and the best prose writer that the industrial workers of the world, also known as the Wobblies, or the IWW, ever produced. To others, he was Matti Valentin Poikkahuta, the name with which he was born in Ashtabula, Ohio, to immigrants from Finland who had arrived in the US in 1879. Born on the 14th of February 1882, his middle name means son of Valentine, a poetic epithet that may speak to the creativity of his family lineage, but which also anticipates his future as a columnist, poet, and songwriter. Huta's early life included time within the Ashtabula harbour school system that provided Finnish immigrants with an education in what F.R. Leavis would famously call the Great Tradition, a canon of traditional British and Anglophone US-American literature, as well as a smattering of Greco-Roman classics. This literary background would influence Slim enormously, as can be seen from his frequent references to figures such as William Shakespeare, Thomas Gray, Charles Dickens, Henry Wadsworth Longfellow, Seneca the Younger, and many others. Such influences were mixed with those of his Finnish background.
Following school, Huta worked on the docks and married in 1902. Details are scant, but he left his family 10 years later. A divorce notice granted to his wife in 1916 indicates that Huta's whereabouts were by this time unknown. His first publication in the Wobbly Press would be what is today his best-known song, the Popular Wobbly, in April 1920. The song explores the experience of radicals punished for their political beliefs by the railroad police, judges, and many others. This theme of political persecution, carried off with trademark wobbly humour, would be a persistent thread throughout his work. At the time of the song's publication, he had not yet adopted the name T-Bone Slim, since the author of the Popular Wobbly is enigmatically stated to be ... By the time he came to write his first prose publication in the IWW Press on the 2nd of April 1921, he had lighted upon the moniker by which he would become best known.
The IWW provided the milieu in which Slim would write over 1,000 humorous and polemical songs, poems and columns until his passing in 1942. The organisation's basic precepts and analysis of society furnished the political and social framework for his writing. Formed in 1905, the IWW implacably condemned the class system, with the preamble to its constitution holding that, quote, the working class and the employing class have nothing in common, and that it was, quote, the historic mission of the working class to do away with capitalism. The Wobblies prescribed industrial unionism as the solution to poverty and exploitation. Direct action via strikes, boycotts and other means made up its tactical repertoire, while its organisational vision was of one big union, to unite all workers within industries. Employing the strategy of education, organisation, emancipation, it was envisaged that union bodies under worker control would engage in militant action, building confidence and experience until they reached a point at which a society-wide general strike could be called. Having prefiguratively built, quote, the new society within the shell of the old, organisation of the working class would be so thorough that it would abolish the wage system, take over the reins of production, and establish a cooperative commonwealth.
The IWW's philosophy was the antithesis of the hierarchy and vanguardism of the socialist and later Leninist traditions, being bottom-up rather than top-down. Initially, the IWW's constitution allowed for some form of what it deemed political action, that is, involvement in parliamentary and state politics. After a major split at the union's 1908 convention, reference to such tactics and strategies was removed. While individual members could, and did, remain active in political parties, the IWW's approach as an organisation became one of direct action. This involved activities carried out and guided by rank-and-file workers to confront opponents and solve problems without recourse to mediators, government, or entrenched leadership. Slim was in fierce agreement with these methods and regularly criticised politicians and political parties of all stripes. In one of his articles, Slim claimed to have been introduced to the concept of industrial unionism in 1916. With Slim, we can never be sure that his biographical references are true, and many are obviously not intended to be taken seriously. However, if he did join in 1916, then this was both an auspicious and tumultuous time for him to do so. Although representing a fraction of the US working population, the IWW punched far above its weight industrially and culturally, capturing the radical zeitgeist of the time.
The IWW's concentration in key industries and its ability to disrupt them made it a target of massive federal repression after the US entered World War I. The union's formal membership bounced back to reach an estimated peak of more than 58,000 members from late 1922 to 1923. But this situation changed following a brutal split in 1924, the direct causes of which included the fallout of repression, personality clashes, debates over levels of centralisation and industrial strategy, and other ideological and practical differences. It does not appear that Slim was ever an organiser or held an administrative role in the union. He does not appear to have attended a convention or served as a workplace delegate, nor did he offer much commentary on internal union matters. Nevertheless, following the split, he remained a steadfast member of the majority form of the IWW, which operates up until the present.
Beyond his education and experience as a radical unionist, a key influence upon Slim's work was his immersion in hobohemia. In its formation, the IWW had tapped into and contributed to the subculture that emerged among transient workers in the United States during the late 19th and early 20th centuries. Known as hobohemia for its alternative outlook and values, this was arguably the first American counterculture. Hobohemia was a literary subculture, not only because many of its members could read and write well, but also because it privileged the art of storytelling. Indeed, the spinning of tall tales at hobo campfires was so common and such an important element of creating the hobo community that it was part of the appeal of transiency and became the stuff of legend.
Alongside Jack London, Jim Tilley, Ben Reitman, and others, Slim brought this world and its outlook to the printed page. In their early years, Slim's IWW contributions were prolific, appearing in almost every issue of the Industrial Worker newspaper, even though it was produced twice a week at this point, in addition to publications Industrial Solidarity and One Big Union Monthly. For a time, he also appeared in the communist-aligned Truth, a newspaper that was published by Duluth's West End Labour Association until it was shut down following government repression. His work also featured, generally as reprints, in other IWW newspapers, including the Finnish language Industrialisti. In later periods, his columns would disappear for months, even years on end. Occasionally, a brief explanation relating to work or health was given, but often no comment was made at all.
Slim's core audience was made up of fellow Wobblies and those in associated radical and ho-bohemian milieu. In addition to being sold to the public via street sales, single copies of Wobbly newspapers and publications circulated beyond individual purchases and were passed on and shared in union halls, left-wing libraries, work camps and hobo jungles. Via these means, Slim's columns would have reached tens of thousands of people per week during the early to mid-1920s. His songs and poems extended much further through being communally sung and recited by generations of radicals and hobos, as well as being reprinted as cards and appearing in multiple editions of the Little Red Songbook.
Although the number of IWW publications steadily dropped following the 1924 split, Slim continued to be a key contributor. As already noted, he had periodical and largely unexplained absences, but an extended absence from 1933 to 1936 emerged from disagreements that he had with the then editor of The Industrial Worker, Ralph Chaplin. Chaplin was one of the union's longest-running illustrators and propagandists, and is perhaps best known as the composer of the song Solidarity Forever. Having previously edited the IWW newspaper Solidarity from 1913 to 1917, Chaplin took the helm of the Industrial Worker in 1932. Favouring a more news-oriented propagandist style and advocacy of an idiosyncratic form of technocracy, he disliked Slim's work and seems to have wanted him to take a more didactic, even preachy direction. The exact details of the conflict between the two men are unclear, but Slim, along with others who clashed with Chaplin over politics and style, did not return to the Industrial Worker until the editor left the Union under acrimonious circumstances in 1936.
Slim's writing mostly consists of non-fiction articles, either reportage of his life as a transient worker or opinion pieces giving his view on a range of subjects. Interspersed and among these are poems, songs and other formal experiments such as short works of fiction and even the occasional one-page play. Although his tone tends towards the humorous and at times the absurd, there are articles and poems that are variously angry and melancholic. The earlier writings contain more first-person reportage because this was a period during which Slim was, with some exceptions, living a transient life, moving in between jobs in different states during the spring, summer and fall, followed by a winter period spent in a large town or city. His articles from the mid-1930s onward are more opinion-based, since by this time he was settled into his work in the New York docklands and therefore less able to report from what he would have seen as the hobo front line.
Whenever they were written, Slim's articles are typically fragmentary, being made up of unconnected observations made over a series of days or weeks, and then sent on to his editor for publication. Generally speaking, Slim's work is characterised by a combination of an accessible and direct style, dark humour, and literary experimentation. His direct style, which he himself described as a little blunt, is a result of his background and is, we believe, an attempt to create a literature for and of the working class. Slim criticises authors who are overly verbose and praises those, such as Oscar Wilde, who could say a great deal in a short space. The reasons for this are fairly straightforward. Working class people have less time and energy for pursuits such as reading. But a direct style is not simply due to lack. It was also part of a hermeneutics of suspicion, a stripping back of bourgeois obfuscations typically written in language such as legalese or political economy, that working class people not only were not trained to understand, but which they often saw as deliberate attempts to conceal the reality of their exploitation. Such an attitude and approach was also in keeping with wobbly and, more broadly, syndicalist sensibilities. While many IWW members were well read, the theory and observations they produced were typically framed as direct expressions of practical truths, emphasizing grassroots knowledge from below. Above all, though, it was humour that gave Slim's work its popularity. Hard-bitten observation laced with levity and satire, both in response to depredation and prejudice, was common amongst hobos and wobblies, both in song, oral storytelling, and written form. Hobohemia, the working-class subculture in which hobos operated, privileged stoic humour in the face of adversity, and Slim's articles certainly contributed to creating that culture.
Slim understood that humour often works best through incongruence. Sometimes this means he'll describe mundane events in deliberately overblown language, as when he applies for a job as a dishwasher, or in his words, offers to emancipate his future boss from, quote, the drudgery of the sink. At other times, this humour operates through a rhetoric of disgust, as when he describes the snot rolling down a lumber camp cook's nose and being rolled into the pie crust meant for lunch, and the cook telling Slim he cannot understand why men keep quitting the job. Quote, that's the way they are, I consult him. They quit for no reason at all. And sometimes his humour is so serious it makes us want to cry, as when he describes conditions as being so bad that it is too expensive to commit suicide. Quote, even the lowly rope is beyond the means of the average citizen. For Slim, as for the best comedians, humour was often serious, and the serious business of life was often funny. Or as he puts it, I am on the verge of hysterics because of my seriousness.
Perhaps the most surprising aspect of Slim's work to those who are new to him is that despite being committed to writing accessibly, he often experiments with literary form and plays with language in a manner reminiscent at times of literary modernists. Franklin Rosemont, a poet, cultural historian and member of the IWW from the 1960s, saw in Slim a proto-surrealist forebear and inspiration, a writer who privileged play above all else. A common focus in Slim's writing is on the necessities of life, such as wages and the inability to get decent food. He concentrates on these everyday features because they were what most concerned him and, he knew, his audience. Labour, he writes, has a bad habit of getting hungry, while mealtime, he says in another article, is an epoch in the history of today. Focusing on these quotidian elements allows him to frequently point out their absurdity, seeing humour in otherwise grim situations, such as encountering lice in his cheap flophouse bed, or finding 4 3/4 flies in his meat pie, 1/4 having been cut through by his knife, or spending an entire night fending off Michigan mosquitoes while sleeping on the streets of Detroit. He rejects the idea that labour has inherent dignity, noting wryly that the people who popularise such ideas are never the people actually doing the work. He observes that the capitalist system does not provide equity for those who make its products, including the fact that workers are typically fed cheap, processed foods, while the rich enjoy the best quality ingredients. His obsession with food in his writing is also partly explained by the fact that he was an excellent cook, sometimes serving in this capacity on work sites.
With much of his life deliberately obscured, it seems appropriate that one of Slim's most famous songs is entitled Mysteries of a Hobo's Life. Such mysteries extend to his death at age 60, when his lifeless body was pulled out of New York City's East River in May 1942. Was his death accidental? Did he kill himself? Or was he a victim of political or mob violence aimed at silencing his anti-war voice? We'll never know. What we can conclude is that while much has changed since Slim's time, too much remains the same. As such, his exposure of the inanities and fraud at the heart of capitalism remains ever relevant, penetrating and entertaining. We believe that artists and musicians may find further inspiration in the form and content of Slim's writing, and that political activists will see in him a precursor and fellow traveller, someone who will be marching in the streets and camping on the picket lines for a better world in the 21st century, just as he did in the 20th.
Thank you for listening. To help others find anarchist essays, please rate and review us wherever you find your podcasts. And if you're interested in anarchist ideas, why not check out the journal Anarchist Studies? For over 20 years, Anarchist Studies has been publishing original research on the history, theory, and practice of anarchism. For more information, visit www.lwbooks.co.uk/anarchist-studies.